The Commission drew on an eclectic policy framework which drew on public health, consumer protection and medical strands in looking at what was needed or what would work. You could call it a pragmatic framework, probably, Bernie. We focused in particular on two areas: the gambling environment, the environment within venues where gambling takes place, and secondly, informed consent. And in three key areas, we saw a need for increased regulation. I'll just speak very briefly about these. One is so-called pre-commitment options. Secondly, by reducing the intensity of play and the capacity for people to lose money in a short period of time. And thirdly, in reducing the accessibility of the more harmful gambling forms. Now, the first of these, the pre-commitment, is akin to executive remuneration in the sense of trying to make the market work better. The focus here is on informed choice, on giving greater power to consumers. And essentially what it involves, what pre-commitment involves, is making use of technologies, and there's very rapid advances going on right now, to allow gamblers to set limits on their own future behaviour in relation to how much they would like to lose and how much time they'd like to spend. We've argued that this should be voluntary, but importantly, in drawing on the behavioural economics literature, that the system should be an opt-out system rather than an opt-in system, and some of you will know it can make a big difference. Well, Victoria has indicated that it will introduce a pre-commitment regime by 2016. The Commission has recommended that this be extended to all jurisdictions. But we've also put some pegs in the ground in terms of what kind of regime would be effective in dealing with these problems. And in particular, it needs to be a regime that has universal coverage, one that covers not only all of the machines in a venue, but all of the venues within striking distance of any particular problem gambler. Meanwhile, until that happens, and there's a lot of work that would need to be done to achieve that, and a degree of coordination, particularly in terms of standards, will be very important, there's a strong case for constraining the scope for losses by problem gamblers without impairing the enjoyment of recreational gamblers. Currently it's possible, I don't know whether anyone's tried this, but it's currently possible to bet up to $12,000 per hour on a pokie machine. And you can lose on average $1,200 per hour, but you can lose a lot more than that. That's a hell of a lot for a recreational activity. The Commission's therefore recommended that there be a substantial reduction in how much one can bet with each button push, down from $10 or $5 a push to $1, and how much money can be fed into a machine at any one time. Believe it or not, you can feed $10,000 into a machine and having sitting there at any one time. We've suggested what looks like a revolutionary change to $20 to $40 at any one time. Such changes will impact on problem gamblers, however, and indeed it will irritate them, and that's the whole purpose. They themselves recognise that they want to be irritated at such moments when they're in their more lucid states of mind. Now, while this will help the 1 to 2% of the population in that category without hurting many of the other 98%, it will hurt the bottom line of clubs, hotels and casinos. And it will hurt the tax revenue of governments, another reason why the Henry Review is so important. But the important thing is that overall, the Commission's judgment is that the nation's welfare would be enhanced by that shift in the balance of regulation from freedom to intervention. Well, just quickly, some lessons that I take from those two current inquiries in terms of the bigger issues of getting the right balance in regulation between the market and intervention. But we came up with quite different answers in terms of the degree of intrusive intervention that was warranted. So the first lesson about intervention and markets is that it's horses for courses, again drawing on Bernie's comment about the need for pragmatic approach. Unless you're operating in a perfect market with social and private valuations and effects coinciding and complete information for all, there will be a case potentially for some intervention to influence behaviour, and how much and what kind will depend on the particular market. Secondly, interventions that can target the source of a problem without having an effect on side effects or other collateral damage will generally be superior and give greater confidence of a net benefit for the community over the longer term. In the case of gambling, as I indicated, we calibrated the measures to be ones that had disproportionately their impacts on problem gamblers. And in the case of executive remuneration, a number of the recommendations that we've made essentially involve codifying what already is accepted as best practice by the best firms. Thirdly, sometimes while markets give rise to social costs, there's no intervention that can reduce those costs without involving greater costs. In other words, in some situations, while we'll see a problem, there's no way for government to solve it without causing greater problems. And in those situations, although it's politically difficult, no action is the most appropriate course for government to adopt. Fourthly, knowing whether and how to intervene so as to do good, at least not to do harm, is rarely straightforward, and getting this right demands good analysis and good evidence, which must include consultation with those likely to be affected, so it also requires good process. The Commission's never done an inquiry where our final report to government hasn't differed or benefited from the exposure of the draft report to feedback from the community. The law of unintended consequences holds most firmly when consultation is weakest. So fifthly and finally, and related to that, there are particular risks of unintended consequences when making ad hoc or piecemeal changes to an interactive system, which is the essence of a market. One example that came to light in our executive remuneration inquiry illustrates how risky that can be. Public concern in the United States about rising levels of remuneration in that country led to a cap being placed of $1 million on the tax deductibility of base salaries. This had two unforeseen consequences. One was a levelling up of base salaries more generally to that ceiling, to that $1 million ceiling, but the second and more problematic one was a rapid growth in less transparent forms of remuneration involving obscure incentive structures that have since been implicated in the origins of the global financial crisis, among other things. So in summing up, markets perform a very valuable role. They're integral to the process of economic development and the reduction of poverty worldwide. But they're rarely entirely free and indeed depend for their existence and proper functioning on a framework of regulation. Markets also cannot meet all policy goals and need to be complemented by government intervention that either fills the gaps or influences behaviour of market participants to align the private and public interests. Getting this right is very hard. Learning by doing is an important part of that, but like all experiments, it should be possible to change regulation, change intervention in the light of experience, and that can be particularly hard to do. The global financial crisis has revealed weaknesses in financial regulation, especially overseas, which calls for action. But the solutions need to be carefully calibrated to address the source of the problems and not give rise to collateral damage on innovation, productivity and the benefits that flow from that. In other words, there needs to be careful analysis on the merits and accounting for the system as a whole. That's very challenging, but getting it right will bring dividends for the whole community. Thank you very much.